Hello and welcome to another video of Wargame Airland Battle. During the last week I have been receiving several questions and suggestions of people who want to see well, a little bit of explanation of the mechanics of this game. Now make no mistake, I'm a newcomer to this game. I've been playing it for 2 weeks now and while I think I more or less understand it, I'm no expert yet. I'm going to link a couple of channels below where you can check out for some extremely good gameplay videos from people who really know what this game is all about. Particularly Raptor is one of the best players. Actually, I learned a lot about this game from him. But well, I'm going to do my try here to explain to you how this game works. And in the first chapter of this kind of videos, we are going to visit the units and see exactly what they do and how they work, as well as well, their stats and their well, how that affects the way they play into the game. So let's go, for instance, and let's uncheck all the nations except for one. Let's go first for the Soviet Union and take a look. First of all, you will see, well, this is in Spanish, the UI, which is kind of unfortunate, but I will try to make my best explaining to you what each tab says. First of all, you can select the units you want to see. This is the armory. And then the nations you want to see, you can click and click, etc. That's a UI thing that doesn't really matter to the game mechanics. So I selected to see PAC only and USSR only. Now there are several categories of different kind of vehicles, infantry, etc. This is logistics, this is infantry, this is support, this is tanks, this is reconnaissance, this is vehicles, helicopters, and planes. Which is pretty funny because in Spain planes is aviones, and while they're updated, this is support, in Spanish is apoyo, they didn't change this, which should be avi of aviones, nor not PLA from planes, but wherever. It's kind of funny, I just noticed that. So in each of these different tabs, you will have the different kind of vehicles that are in the game. Now let's do a fast overview of what each kind of category is about. Logistics deals with the supplies of your army on the field, and also with the command vehicles. I'm going to explain this a little bit further when we explain the vehicles properly. Infantry is self-explanatory. It deals with all kinds of infantry, men on foot you can have in your army. By default, and is something that is like that, I mean, there's no infantry that comes without a vehicle. So you will have to select the infantry you want as well as the vehicle you want to have them moving on. You can go from simple trucks, simple APCRs, up to helicopters, more advanced infantry fighting vehicles, for instance a BMP, etc. So there are a lot of choices here. Of course, the better the vehicle, and the better the infantry, the more expensive it will be. You can see here you have a number up to the left in each card, and that's the cost of each card. For instance, the Morskaya Pichota, or however they are spelled or said or whatever, has a base cost for the infantry of 25. Is really good infantry. And then you have a +1 if you want a truck, a +10 if you want a BTR 60, a +15 if you want a BTR 17, a +20 if you want a BTR 80, and a +45 if you want a helicopter. So you are going to more or less pay both for the transport and the infantry. This opens up for a lot of gameplay decisions about which infantry you want. And also there are some instances of very cheap infantry that can be selected with very powerful infantry fighting vehicles. So people actually pay for the vehicle and then they get the infantry as a bonus, like for garrisons, etc. But well, that's the way it works. Next you have support. Support cover anti-aircraft support and artillery support. Now, probably this is the for me, it's the most important tab in the whole selection process. Probably because without proper AA coverage, you are doomed, really. And there are some nations that really, I think, they are nearly unplayable because they simply don't have enough anti-aircraft. But we will move into that in a future update of units, etc. Right now, we are going to see that, well, we have self-propelled anti-aircraft. Well, you can have self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, for instance, the Silkas. You can have mixed self-propelled anti-aircraft guns and SAMs, for instance, the Tunguska, which has both anti-aircraft guns and anti-aircraft missiles. Then you can go and move on to where they are short-range air missiles, like the Strela vehicle, or long-range radar-guided missiles, like the Book, which is probably the best AA in the whole game because it has some huge range. Now, the thing here is that ideally you want a little bit of everything, a little bit of close range support and a little bit of long range support. Also, you have to keep in mind that radar-guided missiles can be targeted by SEAD planes, and they are really vulnerable unless you are switching off the radar all the time. So, but of course, with radar switched off, the missiles won't shoot. So it's kind of a little bit of a deal here. So, for instance, if you have a Tunguska, which has a radar-guided anti-aircraft gun, but has a guided missile, which is optically guided, not by radar, you can switch off the cannons and rely only on the missiles, which aren't targetable by SEAD coverage, and that's probably why this unit is the best in the game, in my opinion, for anti-aircraft job. You have, well, of course, air missiles can't get targeted by radar, but of course they suffer from a much lower range. So you want to really build up an anti-aircraft force that is both credible, is not overly susceptible to be killed by SEAD, and that can support your units, and that's really one of the biggest challenges in deck building, in my opinion. Next in line you have the artillery, and the artillery comes in three flavors. Actually it's two, but I divide it in three personally. The first is the mortar artillery. Mortar artillery has a very high rate of fire, fires a lot of rounds in very short span, but of course it has a very short range. And it's not really good in accuracy either. This is for close range support, for laying smoke screens is really good, for instance, and it's also pretty cheap. Then you have your standard gun artillery, for instance the 2S3 Akatsiya, which is the Soviet one. This is your standard gun-mounted long-range, more or less, artillery, which fires at not unreasonable rate of fire, and doesn't have a lot of accuracy, but is good for, well, all kinds of job. You can go, well, depending on the unit, of course you will have more precision, less precision. The more precision you have, the more accurate your fire will be at long range, so it's kind of better. You can use it for counter battery fire to fire at the enemy artillery. You can use it to lay smoke screens. You can use it, of course, for support fire, the usual way you want to use your artillery, etc. And that's very good to suppress enemies and to favor an attack. And finally, you have the huge ultra long range, massively destroying and brutally massacring ultra long range, ultra heavy howitzers. For instance, the 2 S7M Marka, which is a 203 millimeter howitzer, and yeah, that's pretty awesome. Of course, it also comes with another thing, that it has an amazing precision and accuracy. So, with a range of 42,000 meters, you can shoot virtually anywhere in the map, and with this precision you can really pinpoint enemies. The problem is that it has very low rate of fire. but these things can really snipe off enemy units. They are really precise, they are really accurate, but they come at a cost. They are really expensive. You don't get a lot of them, and they shoot really slow. So they are not as flexible as the standard artillery is. They are not as fast, quick, and quick firing as the mortar artillery is. But well, it can massacre enemies from the other side of the map. So it's kind of whatever you want to have in your deck, you will have to choose from. You will have to choose from a decent set of anti-aircraft assets to build up your anti-aircraft cover, and then you will have to choose which kind of artillery you want, if any. Usually you want some, at least some mortars are really needed. But yeah, that's it for the support tab. Next in line you have tanks. The probably most misunderstood unit in this game, because people think that getting 16 tanks in a very tight package and moving them to the enemy is going to work, and doesn't work that way. You have several kind of tanks, of course, from very low end and very cheap tanks that cost 20 per unit. For instance, the T-55, which is very bad, but it's highly spammable, so you can have a lot of this, to the high-end, ultra-expensive, top-class heavy tank with anti-tank missiles, very heavy armor, etc. Now, what I usually do is to class these vehicles in 4 tiers, and that comes from the range of the main gun. If you notice, you will have, there are 4 standards. It's as simple as that. You have 2,275 meters for the top class. I mean, there's no tank which main gun fires farther than this. So that's the tier 1, so to speak. Then you have tier 2. In tier 2, you have tanks that fire at 2,100 meters. At tier 3, you have tanks that fire at 1,925 meters. And finally, on the low end of the scale, you can't see it here, but you can see it here, which is pretty much the most useless thing in the game. There are some really old tanks that have 1,575 meters of range for the main gun. Now, this is really important, because the longer the range, the higher the chances you are able to fire with total impunity to the enemy. The longer range, the better. Packed units have the total advantage here based on the Russian technology. The Russian tanks are the best. I mean, the T-80U is the most feared unit in this game, and with a reason. First of all, it has insane frontal armor. Second of all, it has a really good anti-tank gun, and then it has anti-tank missiles, which is the only, only the packed tanks carry anti-tank guided missiles, and these, of course, have a huge range of 2,800 meters in some cases. Others have lower ranges, 2,625 meters, for instance, in this case. Well, the thing is that these anti-tank missiles always have longer ranges than the guns. So packed units, tank units, usually are able to snipe enemy tanks from a longer distance from what they are vulnerable to return fire. So that makes a huge advantage. Doesn't mean that NATO tanks are worthless, but still packed ones are much better. So well, there you go. You have several tiers. Usually there are 3 tiers. The 4th tier, the useless crap tank, is only in some very low-end nations. For instance, the East German decks can have this shit tank with only 1,575 meters, but they are not common. The most common are the 2,275 meters, the 2,100 meters, and the 1,975 meters. So that's 3 tiers. So I usually pick one of each, and because they come at scaled costs. For instance, in a Russian deck, or maybe I would take 2 tier 1s, 1 tier 2, 1 tier 3, depends. Actually, this all is flexible and depends on what you do. If you want to have a deck with a lot of spammable tanks, you want to go cheaper costs and lower tiers. If you want really specialized, very high-end tanks, you will have a lot less of them, but they will be much more capable. So it's a kind of quality versus quantity decision in when you are making your decks. So usually I would go for a low end tank, a 60 cost. For instance, this one also has anti-tank guns, which is a really good option. Then go for a mid-range cost around 100, and then I would go for a two very high end tanks of 140 and 170, because this gives me the flexibility so I can use some tanks in the early game and then move on to some really good tanks in the mid game and have a very good late game set of tanks as well. Then again, there are people who just mass up on very cheap but effective units. For instance, the T55 AM2 is really good. Because it has 80 GM and you get a lot of them and they are dirt cheap. So yeah, there are a lot of choices to make in this tab, but it's all about tanks. They have the reconnaissance tab, and this is arguably the second most important after support and anti-aircraft guns. And because if you don't have eyes on the ground, you don't know what's coming or what you are going to meet in an offensive you are planning. Having eyes is really important as it is denying eyes to the enemy. So in order to conduct reconnaissance, you have several different options. Here I like to separate this class in 4 subclasses. The first of all is just straight off an armored vehicles, which are pretty quick. They are pretty small. They kind of see really well, but they are vehicles, so they can't reach to mountain tops. They can't. Well, they are easily spotted. Well, not easily spotted, but they are easier to spot that, for instance, infantry. So that's one class. The second class is the armored fighting vehicle with a recon ability. For instance, the BRM-1, which is a really good one, has some armor, which makes it resilient to enemy artillery fire, to small arms, etc. And has exceptional optics. That's one thing. Well, we will enter into the cards themselves in another video. This is an explanation of the categories. So you have the unarmored vehicles, and you have the APCRs, IFVs, with a recon ability. Then you have the kind of tank with some kind of recon ability. For instance, the PT-85 is actually also a tank. If you, well, it's a PT-90, but well, there are some nations which have actual tanks. For instance, the Americans, if you allow me a second, they actually have a Sheridan there. Let me show you. There you go. This is a Sheridan tank with an infantry, with a scout ability, and is under the recon tab. So, back to what we were. Yeah, you can have even tanks with scout ability. Of course, the problem is that they don't get as good optics as other units, and they are a little bit bigger. But well, you can have them as well. This, for instance, has an anti-tank missile. The thing is that with recon, I don't really bother about weapons. It's a made for one thing. I'm going to touch later. Recon is all about how far you can see and how easily you can hide. So, for instance, this is not really a stealthy unit. You can see medium stealth compared with, for instance, well, actually, it has similar to the UAC, which is kind of surprising. Well, whatever. So you have the unarmed vehicles, the armored vehicles, and then you have the infantry. Now, recon infantry is a very special case because it's not as powerful as the normal infantry, with some cases we're going to touch later in the fourth category. These are guys which are made just to hide and see, not to fight. If you get these guys fighting, you are doing something not really well. These guys are intended to sit, hide, and look. And for that, they have very small size, very good optics, and very good stealth. So these guys are really hard to be seen. They come with a transport, whatever transport you want to use. You can use it to bring these guys to the battle. Usually, very fast and cheap APCR usually does it. But if you want to go with choppers to reach farther into the battlefield and to deploy them very, very far from your starting point, you can do so. Also, you can even go with some infantry fighting vehicles, which are really good vehicles, and you have pretty cool vehicle as well as the unit. You deploy the unit and then you use it as a as a differentiated unit for combat and standalone. That works actually pretty well with some helicopter units. For instance, this one you get a very good chopper. You are going to see the stats here with a lot of rockets, a heavy machine gun. This, I mean, you can get the chopper and the recon. Of course, the problem is that this thing probably will be seen before you land these units. So it's kind of a balancing act. You either want them in a very normal land vehicle and deploy them and use them to silently recon the enemy, or you want them into a pretty noisy thing that can take you very far before the enemy is there. So up to your choice. And finally, you have another kind of infantry, which is the special ops, spec ops. All nations have it, different classes. For instance, the Germans actually have the Germans seems to have a special infantry. Well, the thing is that you have elite options in some decks, and this infantry is really special in several ways. For instance, the Soviet one only has 2 members. You can see they are only 2. Of course, they have an exceptional stealth. They are really hard to see, and they come with sniper rifles. So there you go. You can use that to terrorize the enemy, etc., or to do recon. So you can actually go with some squads of special ops to go hunting for enemy command vehicles or to surprise the enemy from an unexpected direction. Um, Depends on the class, of course, because the Spetsnaz has two soldiers per unit, which is not a lot. These are specialized in looking and being detecting enemies and shooting at them with the sniper rifle. But if you go, for instance, to the NATO and you go with the SAS, you will have a 10 strong squad with anti-aircraft missiles and anti-tank assets and, well, much higher fighting ability, straight up fighting ability than the Soviet Spetsnaz. So depending on the different decks, you will have different options to choose from. And finally, the recon choppers, which are pretty obvious to see. I mean, everyone can see they are very low stealth, but usually they have very good optics and they can reach to spots very, very, very fast. So they are key in coming fast to cover holes in your recon front line to see what you can see, etc. They are also pretty vulnerable. If you bring them close to the enemy, they are going to die. But they are really very valuable assets. Usually you only have one option per deck, but some of them have different choices. For instance, the USSR has the ME2 or the ME9. No, I can't play right now, sorry. And well, the difference is, for instance, the ME9 has exceptional optics, but it's much bigger and is much less well, stealth is the same, but being very small is a huge asset. I mean, it's much harder to shoot you down, it's much harder to see you, even when you have a lower stealth. So it's kind of what you want. Longer reach with your eyes or being a little bit more stealthy. Up to you. Next in line, there are the vehicles. And the vehicles is kind of it's kind of the vehicles that don't really fit into other categories. For instance, straight up anti-tank vehicles, as the SU-12254, which are, well, non-turreted support weapons. Here you have some infantry fighting vehicles in some of the decks. You have heavy support assault vehicles, as the BMPT. You have where it is, flamethrower tanks, as the TO-55. You have very fast jeeps with anti-tank missiles, like the Factoria or the Concourse. So it's kind of place where other stuff that doesn't fit in the description of support, tanks, recon comes in. Usually these are anti-tank assets, motorized anti-tank assets. Of course, some decks have different options. For instance, the Soviets have Silka without radar, which is pretty decent to suppress enemy infantry units, has a very secondary ability against helicopters and can't be shot down by SEAD. So, well, the thing is, you have a lot of options, and these options are those that can't be really put into any of the other previous categories. Then in line you have the helicopters. Helicopters are exceptionally powerful in this game, but they are also kind of vulnerable. If you run them over enemy infantry, they are going to shoot them down. If you run them too close to enemy anti-aircraft assets, they are going to shoot them down. But if you don't and you use them properly, they can decimate the enemy. One or two of these things can bring down an enemy attack to its knees on its own, as long as you kill the anti-aircraft guns fast enough. Well, the guns and the missiles, of course. Really powerful, really fast, really quick. They are really great flanking attacks. They come in very different shapes and forms. You have just rocket helicopters. You have anti-tank helicopters with a lot of anti-tank guns and not many rockets. You have cheapo helicopters with very kind of not really good anti-tank missiles and rockets, but still they are, for the price, they are awesome. And they are even, in some cases, they are anti-aircraft choppers. For instance, the Americans. Let me. This is a pain in the ass. Okay, the Americans have the what it is, the Kiowa helicopter with Stinger missiles. And this can target enemy choppers and bring them down really, really quickly. The French also have them. Well, they have Gazelles, Celtics, which are similar with missile missiles. And these are really cool to kill enemy recon choppers in no time. So you have different kinds of helicopters. You have support helicopters. You can have anti-tank helicopters. You have well, all kinds of helicopters, basically. And now, almost finally, because I'm leaving the last one, the logistics for the last one, you have the planes. And planes are really expensive, really easy to lose if you are not careful. But if you know how to use them, and if the enemy doesn't have proper AA cover, or if you destroy the enemy AA cover, this thing can win you battles alone, basically. They have, well, they come in different shapes. Of course, you have the air superiority fighters with radar-guided missiles, medium range, short-range missiles with air tracking and cannons. Then you have the interceptors with very long-range radar-guided missiles, but no medium range or short-range stuff, and just a cannon for self-defense. You have the multi-role fighters, which have both AA missiles and ground attack options. You have the dedicated ground attack units with ground attack ordnance, which comes in very different shapes. Yeah, you have, and of course, then you have the SEAD planes with anti-radar missiles, which are useless if the enemy is not using radar-guided anti-aircraft, but if they are, they can really destroy their anti-aircraft cover. Then in ground ordnance, you have everything going from anti-radar missiles, cluster bombs, anti-tank, more anti-tank missiles, napalm. You can have just dump iron bombs, and each one of them has a different effect, and we will enter that in another video. Again, these are among the most expensive assets you have in your decks. The most useful as well. They are really useful, but losing them is a huge hit. And they are very easy to lose if you are careless. I know it really well on myself. And finally, last but not the least, the logistics. As I said, no, I can't play. Sorry. As I said, you have command vehicles and you have logistic units. Well, logistic units are self-explanatory. They are vehicles that take supplies to the front and resupply your forces. You have the option to buy an FOB. Actually, since the last patch is no longer an option, you really need an FOB for the most part, which stores a huge lot of fuel and supplies for your entry tracks to come back to it, reload and saddle back to the troops and keep them fueled. And then you have very different kind of vehicles. You can have semi-armored vehicles. You can have non-armored vehicles, but with a lot more capacity and faster. You can even have transport choppers, which are really vulnerable, but can carry a lot of supplies very fast to anywhere to the map. So basically, the choice is yours to make. Now, next in line you have the command vehicles. And the command vehicles is a really important asset. Because they are the vehicles that when you place in a zone will capture it or will contest it. If in a given zone you have one vehicle, command vehicle of your own, and the enemy has none, the zone is yours, and your points, and the points will be for you. And if it has a reinforcement point, you can use it. If a zone has two different vehicles from different factions, it will be contested. No one will own it. So here you have choices that come from the unarmored vehicles, which are really susceptible to enemy fire. The lightly armored vehicles, which are kind of decent, but you don't want them in the front. And you can even get command tanks with all the heavy armor of the tank, and which are really good for contested areas because they won't die very easily. So again, this is what you want to value. And no, what do you want? A heavily and really expensive command unit that can be in the front. Doesn't mean this thing has to fight, but if you are in a contested area where a lot of artillery strikes are happening, it's usually wise to bring something that is heavily armored. Do you want something like that, or do you want something that is more lightly armored and well, easier to hide? Or do you want something that really will die to a rifle shot, but is really cheap and dependable? And so yeah, that's your choice to make. In future videos we will visit the unit stats and how they work, and in yet another video we will visit how to build a proper balanced deck. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you had fun, and that now you understand a little bit better what each of these tabs makes and the kind of vehicles you will find in Wargame Airland Battle. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you later.
When life's a little easy, the stress from the world outside, every longer will be alright.